The Pit Press Podcast.
I know we're not the Pit Press Live. This is a special edition of the Pit Press Podcast, our Lobo Legend series. And Ed, I know I got to throw it to you for at least my age, even though I'm pushing 40. Some of the guests we've had on have been really cool and reliving my love of college basketball and my alma mater, the UNM. I'm actually not the negative Nancy. I'm praising it here. My name is Ryan Tomari. This is a Pit Press Live, and I'll introduce our guest. But let me throw up an introduction to the main road dog that always helps me out on this. He's the voice of the Western New Mexico Mustangs and a Lobo fan since 1970, Mr. Ed Nunez. Ed, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm glad we got a real special guest today, and one of the best players we saw come play. Play here at UNM. And during the time that I think sometimes we'll get into it with our guests in a little bit, and maybe people would look back and say, man, that was one hell of a team that they had back then. So it's I'm glad we have them on.
No, I don't know. I just forget. And then you look and you see the years and it's all 4 years. And it's like, it's times Bob Dylan, times they are changing. All right. Our next guest on the Lobo Legends series scored 1,811 points at UNM in 124 games. He averaged 14.8 a game, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He played from UNM. He played for the Lobos, UNM, from 96 to 2000, 3 NCAA tournament appearances. I hope this is a very special guest for a lot of people listening. His name is Mont Long. Lamont, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Ed, I'm going to throw it over to you for the first question.
Lamont, we've, you've been kind enough. I've been going back and forth with you online, and you were kind enough to come on the series. I sent you a couple of series that we'd already done. We've had some very special Lobo legends here on. We had Kenny, Clayton, Royce, teammates of yours, Marvin Johnson. Mike Winters. We're just about to get the late Greg Brown on last year, and I still can't believe he's gone. I thought about him the other day. I go back with Greg, 30, 40 years here in Albuquerque, and every time he see me, Ed Nunez, every single time. So I was just thinking about him the other day, and I just reached out to Tina, his ex-wife, and we had a little chat yesterday, and I still can't believe he's gone. But we've had Phil Smith on, Bob Lamphere. We've had some Lobo legends, and we're so proud of what we're doing here. So, again, thanks for joining the show. I'm going to start it off here, Lamont. In your freshman season, you were named to the all-WAC newcomer team. You averaged 9.2 points per game. UNM was 25-8 and 11-5 in the WAC. Charles Spider Smith, 17.5 points per game. Kenny Thomas, 13.9 points per game. Clayton Shields, 15.5 points per game. Royce Olney, 6.3 points per game. Season ended in a second round NCAA loss to Louisville, very close, 64-63. What do you remember about that season?
Well, that was a very fun and interesting season. I do remember my freshman year. People probably don't remember this, but I actually didn't play a lot the first half of my freshman year. I went through a 4-game stretch, including against, my home state, Arizona, where I didn't play off the bench. So that was a bit hard, coming from Arizona, being the 2-time co-state player of the year, and then having to come to New Mexico and be a bench player for a while. And I remember having a conversation with my sister and my dad. They're telling me to keep on working hard. And if you keep on working hard, you'll be playing. You'll be starting by the end of the year. And I kept on working hard. My first start was against Utah at UNM. We upset them, and the rest was history for me. I ended up leading the team in scoring as a freshman the remainder of the year. And that team was very special to me and to most fans. I don't know if people remember this or recall this, but that particular team, the 96-97 team, had the top 4 scorers in UNM history. If I recall correctly, Charles Smith is number 1, Kenny Thomas is number 2, I'm number 3, and Clayton Shields is number 4. So that was a very special team, probably one of the best teams, if not the best team that UNM has ever had. It was a great learning experience. We had a great point guard and David Gibson. I learned a lot from him. Charles Smith was a great role model for me. He kind of made me become a little bit more tougher as a freshman versus being a little bit more passive. But I learned a lot from, those older guys who have been there, who had experienced the pit, who had experienced adversity on the road. So that was a great learning experience for me that I carried over through my sophomore, junior, and senior year.
Come on, man. When you mentioned again, you mentioned Kenny and Clayton. They are Kenny and Spider. They went to the NBA. Clayton should have gone to the NBA. You played some pro, tore your knee. That was one heck of a team, man. So I think you saying that, it brings back a lot of memories. Now I got to go back to that 64-63 loss. It was close. I'm here. I'm in my old house. I had moved since then. But Spider's got the ball with like 9 seconds left, down by 1. And I'm like, this is what we want. This is what, it's in Spider's hands. And, Spider didn't see a lane. He passed it off to David Gibson, who did the best he could. But that was, talk a little bit about that game, because that's a game I really believe New Mexico was in position to win. You know what?
That game to this day still hurts me. And you're absolutely right. I'm just playing that whole scenario back in my head. And you're right. David Gibson did get the ball and he penetrated to the hoop. And I remember this because I was under the rim wide open for an easy layup. He shot it, missed it, and we lost. But, David Gibson, I mean, high in sight, he was doing the best he can. He's the most selfless player I've ever played with. But yeah, that was a game that, to this day, if I have to say the top 5 games that probably stings the most, that's definitely in the top 5.
I think for Lobo fans, I remember being like, when Spider got the ball, I'm like, here we go, man. I was on the edge of my seat. And, I think one of the things you said about David Gibson, one of the most natural athletes, not a pure basketball player, pure point guard, but a natural athlete. One of the best. We got to get him on the Legend Series too. The 100-yard dash champion here for Sandia. And I think people forget that his father Milt was a star at Kansas, man. His father. So David Gibson, you mentioned we have to include him too, because you mentioned just he's former head coach here at Manzano High School years ago, and just a good dude. One of the best guys you'd ever meet in your life, man. Honestly,
Yeah. David Gibson, he was, because, there was a lot of firepower on that team. Like I said, the top 4 scorers. There were times where there weren't enough balls to go around with the talent on that team. But I think David did a phenomenal job of being the quarterback and facilitating the offense with, those, strong 4 powerful scorers.
Man, think about that lineup. Coach Patino's got a good lineup, today. But with that, some of those dudes on that team, wow. And I look back on it, I'm thinking, man, I know we'll get into some more of that later. As a sophomore, you increased your scoring average to 14.1 points per game. You were selected to the All-WAC tournament team. You played 40 minutes in 17 games. That's a lot of great conditioning there. The team finished 24-8 and 11-3 in the WAC. Kenny Thomas at 16.8 points per game. Clayton 16.7. Royce at 14.8 points per game. Season ended in a second-round loss to Syracuse, 56-46. What do you remember about that season?
Another great season. One of the main things that was implemented that year is that Royce only went from being a 6-man to a starter. And, Royce only, he had that kind of mentality that he was going to go knock your block off. And I think a lot of us kind of fed off that. So that was the reason why we probably had a little bit more tenacity than we had in prior years and future years, because, Royce only really was able to set the tone and be proactive in that matter.
You mentioned him about setting tones. That guy was something special. Former star at Hot Springs. Man, that shot against Utah. As a matter of fact, I asked him, and this is what he said about you. Lamont is one of those guys that is gifted with unique talent. It didn't matter if it was running, jumping, lifting, volleyball, or gymnastics. When Lamont was doing his thing, you had to stop and watch. A hard worker with elite defense and scoring ability. He is a true athlete and friend. So that's what your friend Royce Olney thinks about you. We reached out to him, and he gave us that nice little quote about you. I thought that was really nice of him to do that.
Yeah, it's funny, me and Royce, it's funny because, back in college, me and Royce had the same birthday. We're both born December 1st, so we used to celebrate our birthdays together. So when I think of Royce Olney, I always think about our birthday celebrations.
Yeah, he's got much respect for you, you and your game, man. And as a person, it's beyond basketball now. That's past. So what he thinks about you as a person. As a junior, you averaged 16.8 points per game. Team finished 25-9. You were named to the All-WAC team. As a senior, Kenny averaged 17.8 points per game, 10 rebounds. Damian Walker transferred from TCU. And I remember when he transferred, he came in with some hype. that season ended in the second round, lost to the number 1 seed Connecticut. What do you remember about that season?
So that particular season was, a little bit different. I don't know if people recall, but Kenny Thomas missed the first like 12 or 13 games that season. And during that season, I kind of took over. I hit 50 in an exhibition game that year. I got fouled on a 3-point shot, hit all three. We won 101-1. I led the nation in scoring the first 14 or 15 games. So that was very nice. But yeah, that was another very interesting season. It was Kenny's senior year. He really wanted to get past the second round of March Madness. That was the main focal point in every game, every practice, every team meeting, is that we need to make it to the Sweet 16. That was our goal. We've gotten to the first 2 rounds of the prior years, but he really wanted to make a main focal point to try to get past, into the field of 16. Unfortunately, things didn't happen the way we had planned. We had lost to Connecticut. And I do remember that game very vividly. Khalid Al-Amin just couldn't stop him.
That's right. God, I forgot about him.
Stop him. Kevin Henry couldn't stop him. Rowan Hanna couldn't stop him. I mean, he just, no one could stop him. And the only positive thing that I take away from that UConn loss was that my former high school teammate was on that team, and he eventually went on to win the national championship. And to this day, he has a very nice 1999 national championship ring.
It's no shame in losing to Connecticut. You mentioned Roland Hanna, man. Thinking about Roland Hanna, that guy was strong. He was a strong ball player, and you mentioned you guys threw a number of bodies at him, and again, no shame there. And a quote from
Ed, could I interject? And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to harp on the loss. I love, look, I'm a UNM alumni. I got New Jersey roots too, so Big East basketball, as much as WAC and the Mountain West, it's engraved in my mind. I love history. I know you said you had a dear friend on that team, and I was going to mention Khalil El-Amin, Rick Hamilton, Jake Voskuhl, the center, the tall white dude. What when you watch them and then they advance and then they beat a Duke team in the championship, the fact that you guys play them, I mean, I don't want to say, is there any consolation? Like, hey, that joke, like, hey, we ended up losing to the champions. But as you watch them advance to the elite, the Sweet 16, to the Elite Eight, to the Final Four, and beat Duke, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, it's always sad to lose, especially in March Madness, because March Madness is such an experience. I tell everybody, any athlete who's just a huge fan, I really wish they could experience the life of an athlete inside of March Madness. But the takeaway from that game, we felt like, if we would have played anybody else that game, we would have been in the Sweet 16 and could have went to the Elite Eight that year. I do think that there was a couple of teams I was on that really truly had the talent to get to the Sweet 16, to get to the Elite Eight, and it just didn't happen for us. It's one of those things that to this day I talk to my former teammates about it, and we just laugh about it. We're disgusted about it. We enjoy going down memory lane about it, but it's just one of those things where what can you do? You always have those wish I would have, could have, should have. But the fact that they did go on and win the national championship did alleviate that loss a little bit, because at the end of the day, we did lose to the eventual national champion.
I appreciate that answer. I know I wasn't trying to harp on it. It's just that team. I don't know. I thought that team went on a run. And you mentioned as a spectator, for somebody, I'm not I make the joke. My mom thought she was giving birth to an offensive lineman. In high school, I was like 5'8" and 135. Now I'm over 200 pounds. I'm lazy. I'm fat. Blah blah blah. But as a spectator and somebody who loves college basketball and the history of college basketball, I've had the pleasure of being to 2 Elite Eight games. I saw South Carolina advance in the Garden. They beat Florida. That was history within itself. Frank Martin. And then I was at an Elite Eight game in the Pit when West Virginia sunk like 15 to 16 threes in 05, and Louisville under Rick Pitino came back and won in overtime. So I understand I didn't play in it, but I think to be a part of that, I don't know. I know I'm going off on a tangent here. It's just you just talking about that. It's a very, very cool experience. I can't imagine it as a player. That's the end of my rant there. I appreciate that answer though. Ed, back to you.
Going back to Kenny, you mentioned that was the senior year and he had to sit out. He had to court case with the NCAA, and he had to fight that. and we've had Kenny on, and I reached out to Kenny Thomas for a quote about you. I enjoyed playing with Lamont. He was so athletic for his size. He made my life easier. And I got to ask you this about the big fella. One of the best big guys here, arguably, maybe. With Luke. There's Mel Daniels, Ira Harch, Greg Stretch Howard way back in the day. Stretch Howard was a heck of a player. Kenny, right up there, went to the NBA. Talk a little bit about his game, and we'll ask you about some other teammates here in a minute. But he was such a good passer out of the double team, man. Kevin Henry made a living off of Kenny Thomas. And Kevin Henry's a good player. He's a good player. But Kenny's, when he passed out of the double, he was a willing and very good passer. Talk a little bit about how he made your life easier.
Kenny Thomas, I may be a little bit biased, but, I think he's the best post player that ever played at UNM, hands down. I mean, you can talk about Luke Longley. No disrespect to Luke Longley. He was a great player as well. But, Kenny Thomas did so many things that, you don't expect from big men. Like you said, he passed. Kenny was a phenomenal passer. I have never played against or with a better passer. And I found that out in high school. My club team used to play against Kenny Thomas and AJ Bramblett. And I remember thinking, like, gosh, who's this big guy who can pass the ball so well? I mean, like, he passes like a point guard. And then who would know, 4 years later that we would eventually be teammates. But he's very physical, very physical. He runs the court extremely well. And I mean, he can make passes that you wouldn't expect post players to do. A lot of people think, he's a great offensive player, but people seem to forget or negate his passing skill, which is phenomenal.
He was when he was doubled, you had to be careful about digging in on him. You had to be careful, man, because he would find you and hit you right in your shooting pocket. A very, I think, underrated passer. Everybody knows him for the drop step. He went to work in the post. He really did. Yeah, you don't get a $50 million contract with the NBA if you don't have some skill.
Right.
So again, thanks to Kenny, man, he just sent it to me right before the show. We got to ask you this, Lamont, and I asked you about this. We've asked Clayton. We've asked Royce. We've asked some other players too. He's a polarizing figure to this day. And he was your coach. He had some success here, though. We look back on it, and I think sometimes people forget. He had some success here at the NCAA tournament. He did. What kind of coach was Dave Bliss?
Coach Bliss was a great coach. One of the takeaways I like about Coach Bliss is that Hawaii was in our conference, and we would go out to Hawaii for about a week before we played. But he always made sure that there was some sort of education element to this trip. Like, we're not going to be out here just practicing and having fun all day. We're going to learn some things. Like, he made us go to Pearl Harbor, watch videos. It was very educational. He was a very smart man, and he took pride in his wits, and he wanted his players to be well versed in off the court as well as on the court. Great guy. He did a great job with his along with his staff of recruiting very athletic players that were fundamentally sound. I think that's one of the reasons why the top 4 scorers are on that one team, because they made a real focal point of recruiting athletes who were fundamentally sound. You look at Clayton Shields. Clayton Shields, in reality, could be a 6'8" 2 guard because, he could dribble the ball. He can post. Kenny Thomas had, was a great post player, but had that extra skill of passing and shooting threes. I was one of those guards who was, always one of the top leading rebounders. So he was really good at recruiting well-versed players. Very heavy-handed. There's been many times where I just have been well in practice for the game, and he went up and pat me on the chest, and 2 days later I have his print on my chest or on my shoulder. But great guy. He really cared for us. He took the time to get to know us, both on and off the court. And through the recruiting process, he was very nice, very nurturing, and it was a pleasure to play for him.
Lamont, that's fair enough. That's fair enough because, as you are well aware, there's some other dudes, that played with you that have a different story. But we asked you, so that's it. We'll leave it at that because there's some other players, like I said, that did not have the same experience, but you did. Royce only said he was very heavy-handed with him, but he looked at Royce as a leader because Royce had been coached by his father, Sam, at Hot Springs. So, so I think that's fair, and we'll just leave it at that. UNM played in the postseason every year that you were here. Do you think sometimes fans forget or take for granted how good they were during those years because of the polarizing figure of Dave Bliss. Sometimes the things that happen later, people look at it and like, oh, they forget. But you're reminding us here today of how good those teams were. Do you think sometimes fans forget or take it for granted that, hey, UNM had success in the tournament? They went to the NCAAs, man, with a chance to advance. They didn't, as you said. There's a couple of plays here or there against Louisville that it could have happened. It didn't. But
Right.
do you think sometimes people forget?
Most definitely. I think people fail to realize is that, UNM, my first 3 years, we were a top 10, top 15 program. I remember the first week in December, in my sophomore year, we were playing the John Wooden Classic. We were playing UCLA. We were ranked fourth in one poll and sixth in the other. And I think people kind of fail to realize or forget that, back then, Utah was a top five program. They had Keith Van Horn, Michael Doliak, Andre Miller, all those guys. And we were just right behind them, every week. And I remember this so vividly because it was such an out-of-body experience. I remember being on the road and watching our highlights on ESPN and see UNM come up with a number 7 next to it, or a number 12, or a number 8. And I think, because it was so long ago, and the negativity behind Bliss that has come, I do think people tend to forget the great success and how elite he had his teams back then.
We had somebody mentioned on one of our podcasts that they felt Dave Bliss was a even better coach than Steve Alford, who's pretty revered here. Alford had some good seasons here, and I thought about it at first. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And then I have to think about it going back. But see, there's that cloud. There's that cloud over Coach Bliss, and that's kind of hard to lift. But I think you're putting things here front and center about what your experiences were and the team. Look at the team you had, man. Looking back on it, I'm like, wow, man, I forgot how good Clayton was, how good Royce and Kenny, and that was a very good team. We got to ask you this, Lamont, because it's a special building that's going to be full here tonight, man, when they play UNLV. An incredible place, man. The mezzanine was still here when you played. What was it like to play in the incredible atmosphere at the Pit?
Man, the Pit, there's no other place like the Pit. I had heard of the Pit before, I got recruited. I remember watching it, at the Pit, as a child. But then on my recruiting trip, I went there, and then for for the first night of practice, I went there, and I was just blown away. I was blown away. The thing about New Mexico is that there really is no major pro sport there. So like UNM basketball is where it's at. And the fans, they are unparalleled to like any other fans in the country. I've never played in such an electric environment. A lot of people don't get to experience this, but back in my day, when you had over 18,000 people screaming, and the way the pit is built, there's no room for that sound to go, so it goes straight down. And when it goes straight down, it goes into your body. And as a player, you can actually feel that. And there's been so many times where a foul's been called or a ref is blowing the whistle, and we can't hear because the crowd is going crazy. And I've never experienced that. I've never seen it since. I've never experienced since. And in my personal opinion, it's the best arena to play college basketball in.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lamont.
And the fans there, that was probably one thing that surprised me the most when I got there, is that like their unwavering support. They bought into the program, they rode hard for the program, and then they also travel pretty well too. And it's just the environment that they make is truly one of a kind. It's truly something that if anyone has a chance to play in, it's a complete honor. And I can't speak highly enough about the fans. The fans truly make the Pit what it is. And it's always a great feeling to go back to the Pit. I went back to the Pit, it's been some years, and to have those 4 years of experiences, and then to sit in the sit with the fans, and then just to kind of be an outsider and view that experience. Put it into a much lighter perspective, and made me realize how special it was to play for the UNM Lobos.
You know what? You mentioned the energy going to your body.
Mhm.
Petey Gibson, the former Lobo legend, he said the same thing back when they didn't even have the mezzanine. They had 14,000 there, and the referees would have to grab their shirt to let them know, a foul had been called. There wasn't the Fox 40 whistles; those were the P whistles back then. So, you saying that the adrenaline, you must have. Greg Brown said this to me. The pit was worth 10 points before you even tipped the ball, man. Greg said that. Yeah.
And it's funny we're talking about, Royce Oney. That play against Utah in the pit, I think it was my sophomore year. Royce was a senior. When he stole the ball, the guy fell, he shot a three. When he hit that, the crowd erupted, and that was probably the loudest I've ever experienced a pit. And from that point on till the game ended, I had a migraine.
That is
Wow.
something else. That is something else. Ryan.
I'm going to do this, even though we have this queued up. Lamont, I'm just going to play this for you real quick. And I got to credit Lee Faria from KOB Channel 4 here in Albuquerque, the NBC affiliate. I'm just going to play this for you real quick. And I'm sorry, we can't hear you. None of us, we're all muted. I saw you talking during that. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, that is probably one of my most favorite experiences as a Lobo player, and is that there's a play that I wasn't involved, but just the impact of that play and just what it did for the game, and just, how the crowd erupted and our team erupted, and how, like, it was close to the end of the game, and it was just a phenomenal experience, a phenomenal time to play in the pit, and I feel truly blessed to be a part of that team and witness that live in person on the court. Such an amazing experience.
Whoops, I'm on mute. I appreciate that answer. And again, I'm going to make fun of myself during this whole interview because again, I'm about to turn 38. I love the history. I've Noah mentioned that. Can I ask you about the old whack? Because UTEP's coming back into the Mountain West next year. UTEP was good. Obviously, I'm so sorry, not running the parade. You guys played against a Utah team that found itself in the national title game. I think TCU was good at the point. I think Tulsa was good. But can you talk, and obviously UNM, you guys were great, but can you talk about that old whack and what it meant to maybe go down to Don Haskins, what it meant to go to Salt Lake City, some of those teams, that you played against, and how good that conference actually was?
Right. Well, UTEP, is just right behind New Mexico State as far as our, rivals. So, we always took that game very seriously. And the funny thing about that is that, UNM back then, we were always ranked by playing them, but UTEP I think in my 4 years, I think I won at UTEP maybe once or twice. And it was very frustrating back then because it was like we would go out and lose to UTEP at home or in El Paso, and then then UTEP would go out the very next game and play some like rinky-dink team and get blown out by 20. But like 2 days ago, they were the number 2 team in the country because they, tore us a new one. So I always, kind of have a bitter feeling towards UTEP because, they gave it to us when they really shouldn't have. But as far as Utah um, is a hard place to play. Very similar to the pit. It doesn't get loud, but they have a really good fan base. Back in those days, they had a couple lottery picks. They had Andre Miller, Michael Doliak, Keith Van Horn, who was a 6'11" two guard. If I recall correctly, Keith Van Horn went number 2 behind Tim Duncan in the '97 draft. So, the WAC back then had a lot of great players, but the environment at Utah, there's one instance that I will never forget. But when I think of Utah basketball, I think about playing at Utah. We were down and we were pressing, me and David Gibson, playing hard while working hard. And Michael Doliak was just sitting at the half court, just waiting. And I'm playing defense. I'm sliding my legs, and I'm 6'4", about 185. I'm a little light dude. And I just remember running into that 7-footer, 290, and he just like knocked me out.
Man.
I like, When it happened, I fell to the floor, and like, all you hear was the crowd just go, ooh, and I was just stuck. So when I think about playing at Utah, I think about their loud environment, um, trying to contain Keith Van Horn, trying to stop Andre Miller from penetrating, and just dealing with their crowd. I would say Utah and Wyoming were probably two of the hardest places to play during
Yeah,
that
you
time.
Yeah, you actually hear about Wyoming in Arena Auditorium. My buddy, I'm named Ed. Look, how many times can I mention the Daily Lobo, New Jersey, and then my buddy Mike Matas. He was a manager for Steve Alford, and he was like, man, when you go up to Wyoming, this is 15, 16 years ago when we were in college, and he's like, it's just like it used to. I've always heard it's raucous, and he's like, when you go up there, it's kind of hard to get up to play because there was like nobody there, and sometimes they would be there in January, February, whether there was a storm and not a lot of people to go to the game. But I've heard when there are people in there, that is an incredibly, and then the altitude is even higher, but it's an incredibly hard place to play. Um, we've asked you about Kenny, and we've mentioned these names: Clayton Shields, Charles Smith, Royce Only. But what were those guys like as teammates?
Oh, uh, it's funny because all great guys, all super nice guys, but will knock your block off with no hesitation when it came to the court. One of the great things about those guys is that they were all focused on the team. They all took pride in the fact that there was no I in the word team. Um, they all love to work together as a cohesive unit. They love to get and critique constructive criticism. They knew that when somebody was getting on them, it came from a good place. Uh, they just really bought into the program at the time and what our main objectives were and what we wanted to achieve. And they helped us get to those goals. Great people on and off the court. What people probably don't know about Kenny, Clayton, and Royce is that they're actually really funny people. They're really hilarious. I mean, there's been many times where they've had me on the floor just dying laughing. Great guys, but yeah, but when it's time to to get serious, they can get serious. But when it's time to have some fun and be funny, they can do that too.
I love the humor aspect. I mean, I would have expected. I love the humor aspect of it. Um, 99 to 2000, a coaching change occurred.
Hmm.
Fran Fraschilla replaced Dave Bliss. That season, you were named first team All Mountain West Conference as a senior, named MVP of the Lobo Classic for the second straight season, led the conference in scoring 18.4 points a game, ranked second in steals with 60. Ed, when I saw these numbers, again, I had the holy you know what moment.
Yeah.
Scored a career high 39 points versus Alcorn State, scored 30 versus Colorado State. You had 29 points versus Wyoming. And in the NIT, you scored 29 and had 5 rebounds against Wake Forest. And you were named Mountain West Player of the Week a couple times. What do you remember about that season?
So that season, to be perfectly honest, was probably my least desirable season during my duration at UNM. As you well know, Bliss had left and went to Baylor. Um, when he actually called me in before he told the team, he told me that he was leaving because I actually declared for the draft as a junior and then decided to come back for my senior year. So we were talking about that. And then Fran Fraschilla came and, it from my point of view, it wasn't really a pleasant experience, to be honest. I'm just being completely transparent. He kind of came into the program and let it be known that, we weren't his recruits and just kind of made our lives miserable to be for no other term. I think he was trying to run some players off, which he was successful at. Um, but um, my senior year, you always want your senior year to be your best year, go as far as possible. That particular year, I think we were 18 and 14. We didn't even make it to the UCLA tournament. We went to the NIT. I think we played South Florida in the pit. And then we went to Wake Forest. And at that point, our team as a unit, we were just kind of done with the season. It was a long season. We were barely 500. We had this new coach who didn't buy into us, and a little bit vice versa. And it's funny because and this is how I ended my college career. When I think about it, I get upset. But we had a team meeting in Fran's suite, And then we were heading to the bus, and then the team had another team meeting just with the team. We, as a collective unit, decided, you know what, we this is not what we want. This has been horrible. Not to say that we went out there to lose, but our main focal point that game was for me to score 26 points or more to pass Charles Smith on the Clayton Shields on the all-time scoring list. And I needed 26 points, and we lost, and I hit 29. So that was, and now that's hindsight, that's probably not the best way you want to, end your college career. But that's where our head was at, just because of, the severity of the changes and just what we went through that year. And I think that showed within our record.
I I don't do journalism full time anymore. It's a career I pursued. Um, and for you to come on this episode and be very candid about that, I don't get, I've interviewed a lot of people. I appreciate that answer. I really do. Ed, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Lamont, one more quote here from, we got all three of them to give us quotes, man. Clayton, Royce, and Kenny. And so Clayton.
And you would not know who the actual guy who went to journalism school was. Thank you for this.
Clayton said Lamont was probably the most NBA ready player we had because of his ability to do so many great things. He could score with ease, rebound like a big man, pass like a point, defend like a madman. He was never too high or too low. He would often have a sneaky great stat line, especially in big games. He was a great teammate. We were lucky to have gotten Lamont because he certainly had his place at top schools. He'll always be a little brother to me. So that's what. And Clayton's just him and I've gotten to know each other a little bit better since we had him on the series. And a great guy. Gosh, doing some great work as a policeman over there in Texas, and a great man. I really enjoy talking to him. A good guy, and that's what he thinks of you.
Yeah, Clayton Shields. As a matter of fact, I just talked to Clayton a couple days ago on Facebook. Clayton's a great guy, and I think, and you know what, and I think that is a fair and safe assumption of myself. One of my attributes is that I really had great coaches growing up. My dad was my first coach, and he was a phenomenal coach. He just, really, took my athletic ability to the next level and then just enhanced my skills, giving me phenomenal skills. My skill set before I got to college was amazing. I had a great college coach. I had one of the greatest high schools, one of the most winningest high school coaches in Arizona history, is Sam Dwayne. And, he fostered my talent as well. He made sure that I was very fundamentally sound along with my athleticism. He ensured, along with my father, that I was able to do the little things that were on the actual stat line. And I think, when I got to UNM with Bliss, he just kind of, picked up from where they left off. And I think that was one of the reasons why I probably had such, above average careers, because, I was fundamentally sound and I did do several things, pretty good. Not too many guards are in the top 10 for most rebounds at their school. I take pride in that. I was one of those guards who was 6'3", 6'4", skinny, but I would go crash the boards. That's why, my senior, I averaged 6 boards. And that goes back to, my dad in high school. In high school, if I had a player who was my height or even a couple inches taller, and Bliss did this as well, there would be plays where they would take me to the post, and I would post up because I was that guard who could post up. And if I did score, I went to the foul line or got the and one. So I think just, having great coaches and them implementing, different areas of skill just, enhanced my ability to be a successful guard.
And then the athleticism doesn't hurt because, as Clayton said, you're a heck of a leaper too. And Roy said the same thing. So that helps. You had a nose for the ball for sure. But that athletic ability in traffic will always help.
Right. It's funny you say that about my jumping because Coach Garcia and King Thomas, my sophomore year, because I was skinny. I had skinny legs, but I jumped well. So they called me Froggy because I jumped so high and my legs were so skinny, they looked like frog legs. And to this day, when I talk to Roland, when I talk to Damian Walker, Brian Smith, I don't know if you recall him, is my best friends to this day. Every time we pick up the phone, they call me Froggy. Froggy, like Froggy this, Froggy that. So it's crazy to me that, that name has stuck and it continues to stick.
You mentioned Coach Garcia. That's Ron Garcia.
Correct.
Coach Ron Garcia. He used to coach here at Albuquerque High for many years. Coached at Los Lunas, Rio Grande. Coached at a lot of places. So yeah, I'll have to let him know you mentioned him. Just a couple of questions left. Tell us a little bit about your overseas professional career. And you tore your ACL. You played in the IBL here, I believe, with the
Yeah.
Slam, the New Mexico Slam. Tell us a little bit about your professional career.
A lot of people don't know this about me, but I actually tore my ACL twice before I even got to New Mexico. I tore it in 8th grade. I actually graduated from 8th grade in a wheelchair. I had to get rolled up by a family member. So that was my first experience. And then my 9th grade year, I only played 8 games that season because I blew out again. So the last 2 years of my high school career, I wore like one of those big, huge knee braces that tore up my other knee, tore up other people's knees in practice. And then when I got to New Mexico, I decided that I didn't want to use that as a crutch. And then when I got to New Mexico, I was very injury prone. During that, I found out that my left leg is 1 inch longer than my right. And most people are off, but by not that much. So I had a lot of back problems. Um, and I had some ankle problems. I mean, there's a time my junior year where I didn't practice. I just played games because of my injuries. But so yeah, so I came back from my senior year. I didn't get drafted. I signed a free agent contract with the Lakers. So I was with them for the summer of 2000. I think I was like the third to last to get cut. That year, their first round draft pick was Mark Madsen from Stanford.
Mhm.
And then they had their second round draft pick was a JUCO player. Um, so yeah, so got cut. And then I went to the IBL in Albuquerque. And there I got hurt, tore my ACL. For a while, we didn't know it was torn. Um, and so then once I got like, proper, medical attention, I come to find out that it was actually torn so bad and for so long that it was trying to mend itself back together. So I had my third ACL and then went back to Phoenix rehab. I went to Beijing and then tore it again. Came back home, and by this time I was 25 with 4 ACL surgeries, and so it was just really hard for me to find, anybody to, take a chance on me with my injuries.
Yeah, that's understandable, man. I think after that, enough's enough. A couple more questions, Lamont. You mentioned you don't get a lot of games in the Midwest Lobo games where you live. What you've seen of New Mexico? What's your opinion? We got to share the Mountain West Conference title. They're trying to win it outright tonight against UNLV. They beat Las Vegas 75-73 earlier this season. What you've seen of New Mexico? What's your opinion?
You know what? They're really good. For me being, a former player and a former player who played, at a height of what New Mexico basketball represents, I find great pleasure in seeing them doing so well. I hope they come out and I hope they beat UNLV so they can just, win it out. All right. But, I have been watching them a little bit. I follow them on Facebook, on all social medias. I'm always abreast on their games. I think Patino's doing a phenomenal job. I think he realizes that this is a special place, and he's acting on it. He's getting the players; they're buying into it. They seem to be having fun, and I think it reflects in their record. So, hopefully for them, they can win it outright, and they can do some serious damage. Come NCAA tournament time.
Whole different thing now, Lamont, with this NIL, business and things like that. And I don't know that Coach Bliss would have been able to afford you, Clayton, Kenny, Royce. I don't know that he would have been able to afford that. Real quick, what's your opinion about where college athletics is today?
So I have mixed emotions about it. I do wish the NIL was around then, because I feel like the people that I played with, how that program was back then, and the environment, I feel like they could have, profited, substantial money. Um, but I do think that the portal in itself is kind of diminishing the game a little bit. But before I get into that, I got to UNM, but a lot of people don't know this, is that I was actually going to go to the University of Washington. They had been recruiting me since like 8th grade. And towards the end of the recruiting process, Richie McKay, who actually coached at UNM,
Yes.
coaching job at Portland State. So that's why I kind of like reopened up some things, and um, Dave Bliss and Tony Benford were just on me like white on rice, and I just felt comfortable there, and there was proximity was close to home. My family was able to come. It wasn't like they had to travel across the country. So I do feel that I at the end of the day, things happen for a reason, and it worked out. But with that being said, and not too many people know this too, is that I was trying to transfer from UNM after my freshman year. Um, Matter of fact, I don't think hardly anybody knows that. But yeah, I was done after my freshman year. I walked in to get my papers, and UNM would not release me from my letter of intent.
Wow, did
Yeah.
not know that. Yeah, that's something. I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad you stayed around. You were a heck of a player, one of the best UNM's ever had. One final question, Lamont. What are you up to now? Tell us. I know you were real
So
busy a couple weeks ago when I called you. What are you up to now?
I live in Michigan, and I'm a compliance specialist. I work for the Michigan Department of Agricultural Rural and Development. My department right now is dealing with the avian influenza outbreak here in the nation, the bird flu. So that's keeping my department busy. Um, it's never ending. And that is the reason why the price of eggs are so high, is because we can't get a hold of this bird flu. So that's been very interesting. So yeah, so that's what I do. I work in agriculture, and I'm on the compliance side.
Oh yeah, you got a lot of work to do. I know a couple weeks ago you were deep in it, man. So good luck in getting control of that, because it's affected everybody, man. And you can only do what you do on your end, and hopefully we'll see an end to this pretty soon. Ryan.
I'm going to go back to basketball. I don't want to keep you much longer. I Googled you today before we had you on, and I was trying to think of things I remember from when I was a kid. But you know what popped up was ESPN, and it's the NBA Draft Index. And hold on, let me see if I can share this. There we go. I mean, then it shows. I just thought it was very cool to see. I mean, even for your name to be on that, and I didn't know they had the draft in Minneapolis, but anyway, to see that, is that pretty cool?
It's funny you say that, because I actually have a screenshot of that, and
That's
just
awesome.
Lobo fan wrote me. I actually posted on Facebook. He sent me 4 cards of mine, and he wrote me this very sincere letter asking me to sign it. And here I am, a 47-year-old man in Michigan. 25 years later, I'm getting, stuff in the mail from fans asking to sign. What is very humbling. I feel completely and utterly honored. But I also sometimes have, this sense of an out of body experience. Like when I look at that picture, I'm like, that's really me. I feel truly best. I'm kind of upset, how my career ended with all my injuries that plagued me. But at the end of the day, I really truly feel blessed that I was able to have these experiences. I was able to play in such a phenomenal and amazing environment like the pit, with their fans. I was fortunate enough to play with incredible talent all 4 years. I mean, from top to bottom. I mean, I can go on for days. Waylon White, Roland Hanna, Kenny Thomas, all the big names. But there was a lot of other phenomenal players that I played with as well. So just the life experience, the relationships, um, was all worth it. I wouldn't change it for the world. There's no other place like New Mexico basketball, and their fans are top tier. And you can't ask for a better environment to play basketball in. And I owe that all to the fans. That's
I I appreciate that answer, and then, like, I guess to the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon world, Mark Madsen coached Utah Valley. He's been at Cal 2 years. Utah Valley came to the pit 2 years ago in the NIT, and we had at the time, nobody was talking about Utah Valley, and they were expected to win the WAC, and they didn't, and they found themselves in the NIT, and they found themselves in the NIT Final Four, and nobody was giving them any love. So I reached out to the sport media contact at Utah Valley Athletic Department, and I'll be damned, Mark Madsen came on our, at the time, Rinky Dink podcast, and it was the coolest thing. And he was and I'm not, again, throwing this out there, he was the coolest guy. So, I mean, but you mentioned your Lakers career. I mean, just to be within that organization, that's still got to be like a highlight of your career.
Well, you know what? It was an amazing experience. They had won that championship that year. So I mean, the fact that I learned the triangle offense from Phil Jackson, um, is an experience that I will never take for granted. And, like the fact that I can say that to me is truly amazing because how many people can say, Phil Jackson taught me the triangle offense while I was in Laker gear. Amazing experience. I got to reunite with Kobe Bryant. We were from the same class. I was a top recruit. He was the number one recruit in my class. And then to just to kind of learn from their seasoned vets like Tyrone Lue. Who else was on that team? Devin George. They had some great players. So just to be able to to play at the pond in the Lakers summer league and just to have that experience is something that I will always treasure.
I know Ed will appreciate that. I'm going to wind it down with one last question because we didn't. I don't know how we didn't get to it. I know we mentioned it prior to hitting record. December 21st, 1999 was a Tuesday. UNM walked out. You and Marlon Palmer, I think Darian Walker walked out of McKell Center in Tucson, Arizona, with a 2-point victory over number 3 Arizona. What do you have any reminiscent of that? I think we actually might have lost him there.
Question again. Sorry.
Oh yeah. We had a bit of a technical glitch there, and we're back recording. I was trying to be super. I'm terrible at questions. It was a pretty damn good question. But I was going to ask was Tuesday, December 21st, 1999. I think Marlon Palmer, Darren Walker was on that team. You guys walked out of the McKell Center with a 70-68 win over number 3 Arizona in Tucson. I don't think we hit on that game. Can you talk about that? Because I remember where I was.
So that game, definitely top 5 games. So, I'm from Arizona. And it was our senior year. And at the time, I think we were like 5-3, 5-4, barely 500. New coaching staff, players really weren't working as a cohesive unit. And we had played them during Christmas break and we had went down there. And, me being a senior, being a team captain, I'm like, I don't care if they're number 2 in the country, number 3. I don't care if they've won so many games. And you never know. You never know. So that entire 5 or 6 days we were down there, I was like, you never know. You never know. We could beat them. You never know. I'm like, I'm not leaving Tucson with a loss. So I just kept on reiterating that, to our team. And lo and behold, we go down there and we're battling and, ball's in my hands and I go up. I miss a shot and Roy Hanna's there and he puts it back in it and we win. So after that, you never know. So I actually got the tattoo, you never know, my leg from that game because you never know. And then after the game, the nation erupted because we snapped their longest home court win streak. They were number 2 or 3 in the nation, and no one saw this one coming for us. So that was probably one of my biggest quote unquote upsets that I was a part of.
I appreciate that answer. Ed, do you have anything left?
No, you know what, Lamont, again, thanks so much for coming on. Great reminiscent, talking about how good those teams were. And, yeah, gosh, and I think we forgot. And you played with some exceptional basketball players. I appreciate your candidness about Coach Bliss. I really do.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
When I throw out the names, I was a younger guy then. And at some point I became a bigger UNM football fan, I think after Bliss left and then Rocky. And I tell this to everybody, so you get the same story. I get it, the love of college football from not my dad, my mom. My mom watches college football like a religion. So I kind of turned that way. And then I had the privilege of covering UNM in college at the Daily Lobo when Steve Alford and I mentioned my buddy Mike, and then 2009, 2010 just came, and it was like I felt like it was almost the 90s again to games that I had went to. But I get a lot of flack on our show because I'm the naysayer, the Debbie Downer. But I've mentioned I love history, and I'm not trying to repeat myself because Ed brings it up all the time. I understand the Norm Ellenberger years. I understand what 77, 78. But I can just say for my money, I've talked to a lot of cool people, and I get a little bit. I don't want to say starstruck. We all put our pants on the same way, but we've talked to Royce and we've talked to Clayton Shields and we've talked to Kenny, and I'm got acquaintances with the guys that were there during Alfred when I was in college, and I'm not saying they're my best friends, but I know them and it's cool, and they know who I am. I can say that I've been doing this a long time, and Ed knows me. I don't blow smoke. This is one of the best, I think, conversations we've had. So I will shut up now. But Mont Long, I really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate that. When this opportunity was presented to me, I could not pass this up. This is an amazing show, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
We appreciate that. Ed Nunez, Ken, voice of the Western New Mexico Mustangs, a Lobo fan since 1970. For Eric Moulton, I'm Ryan Tomari. This is the Pit Press Podcast.